Hi there, and welcome back to the Anxiously Capable podcast. I'm Jess Eden, I'm your host, and I'm a therapist who's passionate about helping you thrive, not just survive, when living with anxiety, OCD, and intrusive thoughts. This podcast is here to remind you that anxiety and OCD don't have to hold you back, they don't have to control every second of your life, and you can live a really good life with anxiety and OCD. So sit back, grab a cup of tea, and let's dive into today's episode where we're going to be talking about anxiety, limiting beliefs, and not feeling good enough, which is something that I often see with a lot of clients who struggle with anxiety and OCD, that belief that they're not good enough. Perfectionism, feeling insecure, imposter syndrome, these are all things that many of us experience, especially if we struggle with anxiety and OCD. Trying to be good enough, and I'm saying this with air quotes if you're not watching the video version of this podcast, but every time I say good enough or not good enough, picture that I'm doing it with air quotes. Trying to be good enough and anxiety often go hand in hand. And I know myself, I've had my own experiences with this as well. When my anxiety was at its absolute worst, and we're talking life destroying, can't leave the house, quitting jobs, that kind of level of anxiety, my self worth and self esteem plummeted. Basically, what happened was anxiety had wormed its way into every single little inch of my life. I started to feel like I was failing at everything, like I wasn't good enough at anything that I was doing, anything that I was trying. And this was even the things that I wasn't trying to do, things that I wanted to do in the future, stuff like that. It showed up in every single little way and told me that I wasn't good enough. And I genuinely started to believe it. I started to see myself as a failure. I started to see myself as not good enough. It had completely taken over. A great therapist and working on my own self worth, building that up, recognizing that not good enough feeling was the thing that really helped me with this. And that's not to say that they don't still show up, that not good enough feeling, it is quite normal. It's common to get that. I still get that sometimes, especially if I'm feeling anxious or if I'm trying something new. That little bit of doubt that goes, you can't do this, you're not going to be good at this, you're not good enough to do this, who do you think you are doing this? But I'm hoping with today's episode, I can help you understand that feeling as well, maybe a little bit where it's come from, and help you build up your self worth as well. But just before we do get into this episode, while I am a therapist, this podcast is not a substitute for mental health support or mental health treatment. And that nicely leads me on to the first point of this episode, which is understanding where that not good enough feeling actually comes from. So, a little bit of doubt, that not good enough feeling is normal. But when it becomes really consuming, you're overthinking, it's turning into a lot of people pleasing, you're persistently feeling like you're failing at everything that you do, you're constantly trying to be perfect but feeling like you can't do anything right, then this could be a sign of low self-worth. And there's many reasons that you might not be feeling good enough, but predominantly a lot of these go way back. Way back, right into childhood. And we're going to touch on that a little bit. So please be aware if you have had a difficult or traumatic childhood, we are going to be talking a little bit about childhoods in the beginning of this episode, but hopefully it will help you understand a little bit more about where this feeling's coming from and what could be contributing to it. So one way that not good enough feeling often shows up is with our core beliefs. And core beliefs are something that we develop in childhood. They're the beliefs that we hold about the world, about ourselves, how we view things around us, how we view the people around us. Generally, our core beliefs dictate how we view ourselves and how we view people and how we view the world. Our core beliefs help us develop our sense of self, and They help us understand where we actually fit into the world. They help us understand what our place is, our role, those kind of things. That's what I mean by how we fit into the
And they're
world.
limiting
So core
beliefs
beliefs
because they
are
are
the
holding us
messages,
back, because they
indirect
stop
or
us
direct, that we
pursuing the
receive
things that
from
we
those
want,
closest
pursuing the
around
things that
us
we
in
need.
childhood. These beliefs can be helpful and they can be harmful. And what I mean by harmful is limiting beliefs. Beliefs that limit our potential, beliefs that hold us back, and they stop us pursuing the things that we want and the things that we need in life. So, if we're given the message when we're young that we're not meeting the expectations of the people around us, we can develop this feeling of not being good enough. And this can show up in not just expectations, but perceived expectations. For example, this is really common in families of addiction, where the message that children receive is that they will never be as important as the addiction.
You can develop
And
that
this
sense
could
of
be
not being good
alcohol, this can
enough
be
because
drugs,
what
but
you
this
see
could
as a
also be
child is that
work.
work is more
If your
important than
parents, when you
you,
were younger,
and work is chosen
were
over you.
workaholics or you barely saw them because they were constantly working, you can develop that sense of not being good enough because work is chosen over you. As a child, we don't have like the full awareness of what's going on in the world. We have a very sort of limited view. So if your parents are going off to work and things like that, you're not going to see that in the sense of, okay, they're bringing in money, they're bringing in things for the family, this is their way of taking care of me. No, a child is going to see that as work takes my parents away from me. Therefore, I'm not good enough as work because they choose work over me. These messages that we get as a child, even if we can see them differently as an adult and we can recognize that, okay, yeah, my parents needed to work, they needed to bring in money, we can still have that feeling that we had as a child of, I'm not as important as work. So that's just one example of where and how this can show up, and that's quite a common one. So over time, that becomes one of your core beliefs. Another example of this can be it's not just parents, it's not just the people around you when you're younger, it can be school, it can be social media, it can be that comparison that you experience at schools. So, for example, if a teacher is constantly comparing you to another student, you can have that deep feeling of, I'm not as good enough as them, so I'm not good enough. Over time, these things then influence our core beliefs. And deep down, we have this deep sense of not being good enough. That what we do isn't good enough, that when we try, it's not good enough, that just us existing as a person, as a child, as a human, as a teenager is not good enough. And how this affects us is this can massively influence anxiety. This can literally create anxiety because you're constantly striving to be good enough. You're constantly striving to meet expectations, perceived or actual expectations that aren't what you want, that aren't fitting in with you, that aren't what you need as a human. And this can leave us feeling anxious because we have the belief that we are not good enough, that even if we try to be good enough, we can't be, we will not be good enough. It's like a hamster wheel, and it's really important at this point to recognize that even if you meet the expectations of people, the expectations that are put on you, it still won't feel like enough because this belief is so deep rooted that you won't be satisfied even if you reach that good enough milestone. Obviously, this is a lot of theory, so it might be helpful for me to kind of explain how this actually looks for me when I experience this, and you might be able to recognize that a little bit more in yourself then. So for me, I know that I've had this little voice in my head that even when I achieve something that I'm working towards, even if it's a really big goal or a small goal, it still doesn't feel like enough when I get there. The goalpost moves, that goal becomes something bigger. I don't get that sense of achievement or that sense of, oh, I've finally done it when I actually achieve that goal. This shows up in perfectionism. I know when I edit this episode, I will painstakingly criticize myself over every breath I take, every pause I take, every little moment that does not sound okay. I will pull myself apart on. I'll notice if I haven't said something correctly, or if I've messed up, or if I've spoke too fast or spoke too slowly. And that is a real example of how this actually still shows up for me. Because even after doing all of this work on my self-worth, this is something that's quite new. I think this episode is only going to be episode 5. So this is still something that is really new to me. And that not good enough feeling worms its way in, creeps its way in, and tries to pull me apart for these things. So, with that in mind, please know that you're not going to come away from this episode and suddenly feel good enough. This is like a literal journey, it's a work in progress. It's not a destination that you reach, it's a feeling and well, yeah, a journey. That's the best way to describe it because you're constantly on this journey of recognizing that you are good enough and valuing yourself. So, like all these things, it's about recognizing that little voice in the back of your head that tells you you're not good enough, that tells you need to try harder, that tells you that something isn't perfect. Recognizing that voice and reducing its intensity and challenging that belief. And that leads me on to my next point. What actually happens when we don't believe that we're good enough? So I've given you a little bit of an example there of what this can look like, what can happen when we have this not good enough belief, when we have this not good enough feeling, but what other ways can it show up? Because the example that I've just given is like my example, and that's not definitive. Like this can show up very differently for you. It might show up very differently for you, depending on where this belief comes from, the origin of this belief. So when you don't believe that you're good enough, you're more likely to avoid failure, avoid putting yourself out there, avoid challenging yourself. This can look like avoiding going for jobs, going to do interviews, joining college courses, going to university, even going on dating apps, avoiding putting yourself on dating apps because you don't feel good enough, avoiding pursuing your passions, the things that you care about and love. It can look like that as well. Constantly feeling the need to prove your worth to other people. So, this is where that people pleasing element comes in. Feeling like you have to prove yourself, feeling like you have to be good enough, feeling like you have to be worthy in the things that you're doing. And a lot of this can be putting value on the things that you give, do, offer to other people rather than who you are as an individual. When you don't believe that you're good enough, you're more likely to rely on the opinions of others rather than recognizing and trusting yourself. You're more likely to assume that everything is your fault, that you're the problem, that this is your fault, these things come back on you, you're in the wrong, assuming that everything comes down to you being in the wrong. And how this can show up is like someone can do something wrong, someone can do something that hurts you, that impacts you, that affects you. And that little voice in the back of your head might say things like, yeah, but you could have done this, this, and this. They might be wrong because of this, but you could have done X, Y, Z. So even when you recognize that someone has done something wrong and hurt you, it's likely that you're going to find some way to blame and find fault with yourself as well. Feeling responsible for other people's feelings, big one, massive. If you feel like this, you probably massively take responsibility for other people's feelings. If you're already not feeling good enough in yourself, you're going to take care of other people's feelings because other people's feelings will make you feel worse. So if you feel like you can control them, care for them, fix for them, make things better for them, take responsibility in one of those ways, you're going to do it because ultimately it's going to help you feel better or you not feel worse, might be the better way of looking at that. Not that it's necessarily going to make you feel better, but that it's going to make you not feel any worse than you already do about yourself. That's a lot. I know it is. It's a lot of ways this can show up. And if you're sat there thinking, holy shit, that's me, is this making my anxiety worse? Then I mean, I'm glad I pointed it out. I'm glad, like, you've watched this episode. I'm glad you've maybe noticing these things, but I understand that that feeling can be awful. I know that recognizing these things, as good as it is to notice them and be aware of them, it can actually feel awful in the moment. So just give yourself a little bit of credit for noticing this, recognizing it. If you need to pause this episode and come back later, do that as well. Do what you need to do to take care of you. If you notice yourself doing any of these things and you notice this showing up for you, here are 3 truths that you need to remember, that you need to know if you're going through this. You, yes, you, listening to this episode, watching this episode, you are good enough as you are, regardless of your accomplishments or achievements. You are so much more than the things that you do, the things that you give to people, the things that you offer. You are so much more than these things. Number 2, and this might be a little bit harsh, a little bit blunt, but I did say harsh truths. No one is thinking about you as much as you think about you. No one is tracking your achievements, your failures as much as you are. Even if you recognize that these expectations come from childhood, maybe you've had a parent that did put a lot on you, that expected you to achieve a lot and still does. No one is tracking that as much as you are. You will still be outdoing your parent in tracking how well you're doing, how much you're achieving. Feeling good enough, actually feeling good enough, has nothing to do with other people and has everything to do with accepting yourself. So doing, being, caring, offering things to other people in order to feel good enough to get that, okay, I feel good enough, I've done enough, I've cared for this person, I've done this, that is never going to actually give you that feeling. The way to give you that feeling is to accept that you are good enough as you are right now. You do not need to do anything. You do not need to be anything. You do not need to offer anything. You don't need to take responsibility for anyone's feelings. You are good enough as you are right now listening to this episode. And it is so easy for me to say that. Like, I can say that to you because I know that you're good enough. I recognize that. But it's harder to say it to yourself. So much harder to say it to yourself. This is what I mean when I say it's a journey, it's an ongoing thing, because it's about constantly reminding yourself of these things, constantly working on this, working on your self-worth, working on the things that help you feel good enough. It's a constant journey. So I know me saying that you're good enough is not even going to touch the sides right now. It's not going to mean anything. Your head might even be going, yeah, but what about this thing I did? Yeah, but what about when I said this? Yeah, but what about XYZ? What about the fact that this makes me a bad person? If your head's doing that right now, just notice it. Just notice it and just notice the things it's actually bringing up, the chatter that it's saying to you, because it might be an indicator of where this feeling has come from for you. Like I just said, it could be a thing around not wanting to be a bad person. If that's where your head's going, then it could be something to do with that. So, with the idea that this isn't as simple as just believing that you're good enough and poof, all of a sudden you're okay, you're fine, you finally recognize your self worth. No, it's not going to be that easy. I'm really sorry. Maybe that's another harsh truth. Maybe we've got 4 there, that it's not going to be that straightforward. But with that in mind, let's look at the small ways that you can start working on your self-worth. The small ways that you can start working on your self-worth today. Number 1, self-compassion. The way that you talk to yourself, like I just said about noticing that little voice, see if you can pick up on that voice, see if you can notice the things that it says, see if you can come up with a more compassionate alternative to what that voice is telling you. I know a lot of people find affirmations quite useful here, but the thing to remember is affirmations are not, they're not about just positively laying over these beliefs. So if you've got that belief of, I'm not good enough because I'm a bad person, saying the affirmation, I'm a good person, is just basically putting a plaster over that. The core belief is still there. So, what is a more compassionate alternative to that belief for you? Not a positive alternative, a compassionate alternative. So, these affirmations can work if they're about compassion, not toxic positivity. If you are searching for ways to be compassionate and positive self talk, just be careful of the over positivity and just focus more on the balanced compassion. That is going to help you so much more in the long run. Number 2 is recognize and celebrate your achievements. So the small things, the small wins, the big wins, celebrate them. And this doesn't have to look like a big celebration, going out for a meal, making like a whole big song and dance about it. This could just be the little ways that you celebrate. So, say you got a promotion at work, what could you do that gets you to celebrate that? It might be having an evening where instead of coming back and tidying the house, you come back and you get to chill on the sofa and read a book and take care of yourself and do some of the things you enjoy. These achievements can be small. It can just be the little ways that you show yourself that, yes, I've done that, I've done it. Number 3 is allowing yourself to be authentically you. So there's a thing that's been probably on TikTok and Instagram and on every single social media platform for years of finding your aesthetic, changing your aesthetic. And yeah, it's cute. Like you can get some outfit ideas and stuff like that. But if you're constantly following these trends, following these changes, you're not actually getting to be yourself. You're not actually getting to be you. And I know I've caught myself doing this. I can sometimes see like artsy girl aesthetic, and I'm like, oh, I'd look really cute like that. Or like the dark academia aesthetic. I'm probably saying these wrong, but sometimes I see them and I'm like, that would suit me. I'd look so cute. I'd look super cute. And I get the idea of changing my absolute full personality, full sense of self to fit this aesthetic. And that's not being authentically you. It's so easy to get pulled into these things. It really is. But that's not being yourself. So, what are the things that make you you? Maybe you love the colour pink. Maybe you love the colour yellow. Maybe you prefer comfy clothes over jeans and leggings and things like that. Whatever it is that makes you authentically you, embrace that. Don't try to change it, embrace it. Be you, dress like you, talk like you, be who you are. Find the spaces that feel comfortable for you to do that and embrace those things. Embrace those parts of your identity that you feel like you constantly have to change or adapt to fit into other people's expectations. These are really small things, really small. I know they are, but they're important because they're the ways that you start to be more comfortable being who you are without having to change, without having to feel like you need to be someone else in order to be good enough. Working on your self-worth means becoming comfortable with who you are. So embracing these small things, these small little ways will help you do that. And that nicely brings this episode to an end. I've thoroughly enjoyed this episode. I hope you've got a lot out of it. I hope it's maybe given you a few things to think about, to reflect on how that not good enough feeling can impact anxiety, how these limiting beliefs develop, and how you can begin challenging that not good enough feeling and increasing your feeling of self-worth. Increasing your self-worth, embracing yourself, being able to be authentically you without feeling like you need to change. Just to do a little bit of a recap at the end, if you feel like you're not good enough, it's important to actively recognize that and celebrate the things that you do achieve, the things that make you feel proud, feel happy, and allowing yourself to feel proud and happy of those things. But also celebrating the things that just make you you, taking any sense of achievement out of it, any worth that's tied to your achievements, your accomplishments, and just celebrating the things that make you who you are. Notice the way that you talk to yourself. See if you can practice self compassion, not toxic positivity, but self compassion, those more balanced phrases, the balanced way of seeing things, just to gently start challenging that belief. Feeling good enough has nothing to do with anybody else. It's about feeling good enough for you. Discover the ways that you can spot your inner critic, that voice in your head that tells you that you can't do things, and ask yourself, what do I actually want to do? What do I actually believe? What is actually good enough for me? And just finally, you listening to this episode, watching this episode, you are enough as you are right now. Whether you're listening to this at work, whether you're driving in your car, or whether you're laid in bed feeling like absolute shit and bed rotting, you are still good enough and you are still worthy as a human. I want you to know that you are enough, period. Just as you are, you don't have to show up anywhere, you don't have to do anything in order to be enough. I so hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, if you found it helpful, please like, share, subscribe, do all the things that help it reach more people, because if you found this helpful, somebody else might need to hear it. Somebody else might need to recognize that actually I'm good enough as I am right now. So please do all the things that help it reach more people. And I would love to hear your thoughts on this episode. You can DM me on Instagram. My account is at Therapy with Jess Eden. The podcast account is Anxiously Capable Podcast. You can DM either account, and I would love to hear from you. So thank you for listening. I hope you have a great rest of your week and take care. Bye.